Every time I read our gospel lesson this week, I kept asking one question. Are you out of your mind? Is the naked, crazy man living in a tomb out of his mind? And if he is, what exactly does this mean? Is he demon possessed like we see in horror films? Or is he suffering from mental illness? Are the townspeople out of their minds for treating this man like a ferocious animal, allowing him to run naked in the wilderness and binding him with chains and shackles? Is Jesus out of his mind for sending a herd of demon-possessed pigs to their deaths, decimating the local economy in order to save one man? Is Luke out of his mind for telling us this story because I don't know about you, but it raises more questions than it answers? And are we out of our minds for believing that this is the gospel of the Lord, the good news of Jesus? Well, this is not one of those stories that can be tied up with a pretty bow. It reminds us that sometimes the gospel is messy, it's complicated. It requires some effort on our part in order to understand it and apply it to our lives. Our story begins with a geography problem. Luke says it took place in Gerasa, whose people are referred to as Gerasenes. However, this can't be true because Gerasa is 40 miles south of Lake Galilee and not opposite of Galilee as Luke claims. Matthew says it took place in Gadara. However, this is also incorrect since Gadara is inland and it's nowhere near a lake. Finally, Mark says that it took place in Gergesa, which is a tiny town on Lake Galilee. Bingo, we have a winner. Geographical evidence supports this as well. Gergesa is only one of 3 towns with a steep bank overlooking the sea, and that's an important element in the story. Furthermore, early church historian Eusebius identified Gergesa as the site of the story. And there's also a 6th century monastery there, which was built to commemorate this miraculous healing. So as our story takes place, it takes place in Gergesa. The residents are called Gergesenes. And the reason why this is important is that Gergesa is Gentile territory. Jesus is out of his mind because good Jewish rabbis aren't supposed to be found walking through Gentile territory, let alone doing ministry there. But we know Jesus, he's crazy like that. There's a long list of stories in the Gospels of Gentiles whom Jesus helped and healed. So as our story begins, Jesus steps out of his boat into Gentile territory on the shores of Gergesa. And immediately he is confronted by a demon-possessed man, whom Luke describes as naked and living in the tombs on the outskirts of town. Well, this man was clearly out of his mind, and the Gergesenes thought he was demon-possessed, and they treated him harshly. They kept him under guard and bound him with chains and shackles. Occasionally he was strong enough to break these restraints and was driven by the demons into the wilds. In other words, he was out of his mind. He was crazy and uncontrollable like a wild animal. And this part of the story makes me very sad. It brings to mind the way we sometimes treat those who are out of their minds with mental illness. We lock them up in institutions. We sometimes over-medicate them or unnecessarily restrain them. And because of funding cuts in mental health services, we let some of them run wild on the streets of our city. We often turn our backs on them and wish they would just disappear. And this is a very painful subject for many people, but I think it's a subject we need to talk about more. There is a difference between demon possession and mental illness. And while they may not have understood this in first century Israel, we should be able to understand it in 21st century America. So when I hear about the plight of this poor, unfortunate man in our story, my heart goes out to him. And I'm sure yours does too. And as we read about his crazed existence, running naked in the wilds and out of his mind, we are also reminded how quick we are to demonize those we disagree with because of race, religion, political views, and the like. Some people can hardly have a civil conversation with those who have a different perspective than theirs. They are quick to judge and slow to listen. They label those whom they disagree with as out of their minds or possessed by the devil. And it's a sad state of affairs. Now let's go back to the story. The man approached Jesus naked and out of his mind, and he says, "What do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." Wow. I hear this man asking Jesus, "Do not add insult to my injuries." This man is exhausted. He's been ignored and abused. He's looking for a small crumb of kindness, a sign that Jesus understands his plight and is sympathetic toward his suffering. And when it comes to those who are suffering from mental illness, I hope we'll be sympathetic to their situation. I hope we will not add to their torment. And when they reach out to us for help, I hope we will have compassionate hearts and sympathetic ears. I hope we will educate our minds so we don't hold on to ancient superstitions regarding the complexities of mental illness. And so after this man asks Jesus not to torment him, Jesus commands the unclean spirit to come out of the man. Jesus asks the spirit, "What is your name?" And the man says, "Legion," for many demons had entered him. Matthew has the best response of this particular man because it reads, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Well, how are we to understand this man's response? After all, we're not too big on demon possession in 2022 unless it occurs in a horror film. However, I'd like to make the observation that all the demons that Jesus confronts in the Gospels have three things in common. Number one, they cause self-destructive behavior to the victim. Number two, the victim feels trapped by that condition. And number three, they separate the victim from family and community. When you put it in that light, it starts to sound familiar. Many of us suffer from the same kinds of challenges and burdens. Some of us struggle with mental health issues. They can be just as simple as depression or anxiety, or much more complex than that. Others struggle from recovery from abuse or addiction. Sometimes we're also our own worst enemies. We make bad choices which possess our lives and take us in directions we never intended to go. We all have demons when you think about it. We all have struggles and temptations that sometimes get the best of us. And our demons also have a habit of multiplying. One bad decision can set into motion a whole host of horrors until they become overwhelming. So if we're honest, we know Legion very well. We are acquainted with its many names. And as the story continues, the demons beg Jesus not to order them back into the abyss. In early Jewish cosmology, the abyss is the great watery deep under the earth. It's a place of chaos as opposed to the created order of the earth. It's the place where the powers of darkness are confined until the day of judgment. And the demons beg Jesus not to send them back into this abyss of chaos and darkness. And what happens next is the weirdest and craziest story that has ever been told about Jesus. On a hillside close to the lake, there is a large herd of pigs who are happily feeding. And the demons beg Jesus to let them enter the pigs. And Jesus gives them permission. And suddenly the pigs are out of their minds. They rush, heading down the steep bank and into the lake where they drown. And when we hear this part of the story, we are absolutely appalled. It seems so weird. Surely Jesus must be out of his mind, we exclaim. Why would he kill a bunch of innocent pigs? Why would he destroy the local economy for no apparent reason at all? Call the Humane Society. Get Sarah McLachlan to do a sad TV commercial to raise funds for the poor unfortunate creatures such as these. This past week, I read everything I could get my hands on in order to understand this part of the story. And most scholars and preachers ignore it altogether, and they focus on the healing Jesus offers. But you know me, I had to have an answer as to why Jesus would do such a thing. Is he just being a good Jewish boy who hates pulled pork barbecue? Or is something else going on in this story? And what I learned from my research is that first century Jews would hear this detail in the story very differently than we do. They would be gleeful over the demise of the pigs because it meant that Jesus had tricked the demons. The demons thought they were getting away with something, but through their destructive efforts, they ended up in the abyss anyway. Furthermore, Jesus' listeners of this story didn't have a problem with this detail in the story because they considered pigs to be unclean animals. They were forbidden to eat them according to Jewish law. Therefore, the loss of the pigs is no big deal, even though it is a big deal to the Gentile farmers. And what I think modern Christians need to do with this part of the story is view it in a metaphorical sense. It's telling us that the demons who inhabit our bodies, minds, and spirits are self-destructive. They can lead us to places of chaos and danger. The bad choices we make not only affect us, but they affect others as well. The pigs remind us that as we move from being out of our minds to wellness, there is always a cost attached to it. And this brings us back to the story. As the townspeople gather at the edge of the lake, they notice two things. First of all, the man is quietly sitting at the feet of Jesus, and he's clothed and in his right mind. And then number two, they see the lake of dead pigs. It's hard to imagine all the emotions they are feeling. Luke tells us the townspeople were seized with great fear. They asked Jesus to leave Gergesa, and this means his healing of the demon-possessed man is hardly a rousing success. There aren't many stories in the Gospels where Jesus is asked to get out of town after he performs a miracle. Usually at least one person says thank you, but not today. It is a day of mixed feelings, a day of surprises and unexpected twists. The Gergesenes are left to ponder what it all means. They have to confront their shame regarding the way they treated this man. They have to sort out their feelings about Jesus, who on one hand has power over demons, but on the other hand turned their village upside down. It's hard to know who is out of their minds in this story. Perhaps it's a little bit of everyone, depending upon the moment and the situation. So where is the good news in our gospel lesson? At the beginning of the sermon, I told you I couldn't tie this story up in a pretty bow. Sometimes the good news of Jesus is messy and complicated. And this is one of those situations. I'd be happy if they threw this story out of the lectionary completely. But what I get from this story is that each of us has our own demons we struggle with. These demons cause a great deal of damage to our bodies, minds, and spirits. They cause a great deal of damage to others as well. And the good news is that Jesus has the power to heal our lives, no matter what demons we are facing. It may not be a miraculous healing like the story we heard today, but I believe Jesus calls us day by day, moment by moment, to move from death to life, from bad choices to better ones, from woundedness to wholeness, from being out of our minds to being in our right minds. And sometimes this journey gets a bit messy. Sometimes it's painful and difficult. But our gospel lesson reminds us that Jesus is on our side no matter what. Others may abandon us along the way, but Jesus promises he will never leave us nor forsake us. So take heart, my friends. Life is tough. Our demons are tough, but Jesus is tougher. And he has the power to move us toward healing, hope, and new life. Amen.